Genesis' first full EV is here, and it shares similar specs as those of the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6. And in this video, we're gonna talk about some of those spec and tech because it gets pretty interesting. And then of course, we're gonna jump into Photoshop and I'm gonna let you know what I think about this design, both the front, the side, and the rear. So it will offer 3 trim levels here with single and dual motors ranging from 225 horsepower in the base model up to 429 horsepower in the performance model. Now the base model is a rear-wheel drive single motor setup and makes a respectable 225 horses and 258 pound-feet of torque. The next step up is a dual motor with all-wheel drive, and this puts out 314 horsepower and 446 pound-feet of torque. The top of the line GV60, called the Performance, comes with a dual motor setup as well and has 429 horsepower and 446 pound-feet of torque, and it claims a 0 to 60 time in around 4 seconds. The range numbers here, this is where it gets really interesting because Genesis claims that the base rear-wheel drive model actually has the most range with 280 miles. And if you step up to the mid version, the all-wheel drive version, the range drops to 249 miles, and the top of the line most expensive dual motor option has the least range. So that is claimed at 229 miles, which is pretty interesting. Kind of a reversed setup as what we're used to seeing. You have the base model going the furthest at 280 miles. You have the performance model going the least with 229 miles. Some of the new cool tech here in the Genesis GV60 includes facial recognition and fingerprint readers to unlock and access the car, as well as a crystal ball shifter, which looks like it could break and be very expensive to fix if it does. Most of the interior has been built using recycled material such as fishnets and plastic bottles, and this is something I think more manufacturers should start implementing in their interior specifically, even if they're not EV related. We need the old fishnets out of the oceans basically. Pricing is expected to start somewhere around $50,000 to $55,000 for the base, which is, to me, sounds pretty expensive, but this is, again, Genesis is supposed to be more of a luxury brand compared to the Hyundai and the Kia, and the GV60 will go on sale here in the US sometime next year. Now let's jump into Photoshop here and let's talk about this design right here because it's a very interesting design. I like the design overall. I'm just gonna put that out there. I think it's a cool design. It has some styling to it that we normally don't really see on EVs. The proportions are still this bubbliness of EVs, specifically this segment with the EV6, the Ioniq 5, specifically the Model Y is probably the bubbliest car of them all. This has similar proportions to those. However, it still has a very strong identity of what it is, and I think that's something that Genesis is doing really well now, just hammering in the brand identity in their cars. So we have the traditional, not traditional, but the very modern Genesis styling here with these 2 stripe headlights that wrap around the front, and you also have the similar styling in the back, which I'm going to show you in just a second. On top of that, we do have some grills here, and this looks like almost the internal combustion engine grill in the front. I don't think it has any holes in it. Maybe these do for some cooling of the batteries, but this big one right here, usually what the EVs do when they design the front end is to make it as sleek as possible to reduce air resistance and drag, to make it as slippery as possible. But Genesis here decided to go with some styling and have some fun, and I think that's cool. This is what I think more companies should do, even if they create EVs. Have some fun, reduce the range by 10-20 miles, who cares? Just have some fun and add some personality to your cars, and that's exactly what they did here. One little tiny detail that I want to show you is this piece right here. This little triangle here is very, I don't know how to put it, it's very annoying, but it's annoying in a good way. It suits the car because it continues from these lines right here, so it kind of fits within the graphics of the car, but my eyes focus on that little detail and I want to remove it, but at the same time I don't. Invokes a feeling of annoyance when I see this. At the same time, I am satisfied by looking at it, and that's exactly the definition of what a piece of art is supposed to do. It's supposed to invoke a feeling. You kind of want to get in and do something about it, but at the same time, it's sort of satisfying to look at. So this, to me, this little triangle here in the front is the definition of a piece of art. The front end, to me, I think it looks great. It's a good looking front end overall, has some cool graphics and some styling to it. You can see that we have this blacked out A-pillar here, which is interesting as well. Kind of gives it like a visor look here in the front end. It looks pretty cool there as well. Now let's have a look at the side view here. This is where things get interesting when we have a look at the roof pillar and the chrome trim that goes in there. So we have this trim piece right here, and then we have a clear cut in the C-pillar, and this is typical for Asian styling, and that's why I love Asian styling, because they put stuff like this in the design that makes it more interesting to look at. They could have just made it simple and traditional. I have a chrome trim piece going all the way down there without this little Z shape right there, and this is supposedly supposed to be a Z to resemble the electricity, you know, one of these zaps, and I think it looks cool. It's a cool little feature that breaks up what we're used to seeing so many times over and over again in cars, and it's also something that's going to make this car stand out among all the other EVs, because we have the same type of proportions here, but we can play and go crazy like they did here in some parts with the graphics of the car. You can see that we have a connection to the front all the way to the back right here with these kind of similar style of the taillights, which I think look great as well. I'm also a fan of these wheels. I think they suit the overall car, and of course we need to have some plastic cladding here to make it look like it could actually go off-road. Otherwise it's not going to sell here in the US. If you have that be body colored, just look at the Mercedes A-Class, I think it is, or GLA. You have to make it a GLA here in order to sell it. You need to lift it out by like half an inch, add some plastic cladding to it, so people here in the US think it's an off-roader and they feel a lot safer, and that's how you sell a car here. Another interesting line here that I want to show you is this, which seems kind of out of place. You see this crease in the body. I just hit it there so you can't really see it now with the red line there. I'm gonna remove it now so you can see it right there. This line, it's interesting because it doesn't really, I can't see that it kind of connects to this piece right here, I guess, but it doesn't have any connection point in the front end. And it's one of these things as well that just decided, let's just throw in a line there, why not, and have some fun. And also you have this piece right here, which I'm not a really big fan of, is this curvature right here, because it looks too irregular for me. You don't really know what it wants to do. If it wants to be, do you want to be a straight line here? Why is this curvature going slightly up here? And then you have a different curvature here from what you have in the front. It looks a little bit too irregular for me, and it doesn't really suit the overall design of this car. And let's have a look at the rear view here, and this is, I think, the best view of this car. The thing that I think Genesis managed to do here is to make the Genesis GV60 actually look pretty planted from stock. Specifically, if you have it from a slightly different angle with a little bit more rear view, it looks really good. It looks like it's sitting properly on the ground. The proportions always remind me, from whatever angle I see this, it always reminds me of the Model Y, and that's not really a bad thing. It's less bubbly, for the reason that Genesis, I think, used graphic design in a very cool way to reduce the overall bubbliness that we see in EVs that I'm not a huge fan of. What I mean by bubbliness quickly is the overall styling of the car and the proportions means that the A-pillar, when you have an EV like this and we don't have an engine in the front, that means that we can stretch the greenhouse as far as we want. We need to have some crumple zones here, so obviously you have a collision in the front, but we can now stretch the A-pillar almost like it as it was a mid-engine or a rear-engine car here. We can use this space better for the interior of the occupants here now, instead of having to move the A-pillar back in order to make space for an engine here, if that makes sense. And what this creates is this bubbly looking design. It's a very almost like a full ellipse inside view, but I think Genesis made a good job here reducing that feeling of being almost like an ellipse, and specifically when we talk about the graphics. So here again we have this cool little thing right here with the chrome trim, and I love this rear end. I think it's a beautiful rear end. The more dynamic feeling that you have here in the taillights, for example, compared to other Genesis models, I think this suits the EV, and I think it suits this model as well better than having them be more straight like we have on more serious sedan Genesis. This is a more fun car. You can see it in the color as well, and you have this bumper here integrated in the rear end as well. I think this is probably the furthest out the car sticks, so if you were to hit something, I'm guessing that is the part that would take the initial punch right there. And this also connects to this piece right here, as you can see. Not sure about this though. From what I've heard, these are cameras. I mean, I know they are cameras, but I know that they are not currently accepted or legal in the US, because the Audi e-tron were supposed to have that, and they had to change that and make it into regular boring antique style mirrors in order to sell it here in the US. Not sure how it's going to be with the Genesis GV60, or I hope the cameras will be allowed here in the US because it looks cooler. You get a more high definition screens on the interior, and I think it's a lot safer as well when you have two screens that clearly show what's in your blind spot like that. It's just a stupid rule that they should just allow here in the US as well. Now the question is, would you buy this, the GV60, the Ioniq 5, or the Kia EV6? I'm gonna make a video on that explaining which one I would choose and why. If you ask me, the choice is pretty simple.